Ron Shevlin, Chief Research Officer, Cornerstone Advisors, and author of the FinTech Snark Tank on Force.
Nick Watson, subject matter expert for our Conversational AI product.
I'm Mike Haney, and I run product strategy for Galileo.
All right, so let's get started. So Mike, I'm going to pick on you. Can you set the pace for like the stage of how customer engagement has evolved and with the influence of AI in this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think most of you have probably experienced firsthand what we used to collectively call chatbots, right? It allowed us to stay in our channel of choice, which was often the web or mobile banking channel, and stay in there to move from a self-service to a more of an assisted a servicing type of engagement. And it allowed us to engage also in a more natural and human way with our bank using speech or text, as opposed to filling out a bunch of electronic forms and pushing buttons that we'd all become accustomed to. Really, our generation one didn't actually include a lot of artificial intelligence at all. It was really more of what I would call an IVR replacement, right? This menu tree of items that you select one for checking and select two for savings and so on. So it really wasn't, it was great for the banks in terms of lowering costs and things of that nature, very similar to the journeys we went on with contact centers and IVRs, but it didn't really quite pop from a customer experience perspective. Then we started to see the next wave, which actually incorporated a flavor of AI that we call natural language processing. And that's where you can start to ask and receive responses in sort of plain English, if you will. And we also started to see around that generation too a wider adoption, especially of the younger generations, the millennials, and now of course the Gen Zs have come along. And they had zero desire to pick up a phone and traverse an IVR tree and talk to a human. So for them, this was really something that took hold. And we also started to see with Gen 2 the ability to do what I call post-logging activities, right? So I can now do more about instructing the bank, giving them tasks to do like move money, because now the experience has now penetrated that post-login scenario. Now we're in this latest wave, and it's really getting exciting because AI, particularly the generative aspects of AI, will allow us to not just give better responses, but allow these virtual assistants to consume larger bodies of knowledge from within the bank and give far more advice giving rather than just giving tasks or asking similar queries. So that's kind of the journey that we've been watching, and also what led us to create our solution called Connect. So let me actually start with Ron and see how are you seeing sort of this space evolve from your perspective?
A couple of ways I think this is evolving. One is evolving away from just being a customer support tool to a enterprise support tool for employees. I have talked to a number of financial institutions, and at first I really rolled my eyes when they said, "Oh, we're making chatbots a member of the team." And I was like, "Oh, you gotta be kidding." But then I, really start to talk to them and understand it really is true that the employees really do feel like they can ask the chatbot questions about work in general. I think this is really super important for a lot of financial institutions, because you're not going to like to hear this, but reality is for a lot of financial institutions, they lost a lot of good people post-pandemic. People with a lot of experience, Betty and Bob at the branches who knew all the members and the customers. And I hate to say it, but what you've got now is a lot of inexperienced employees who need more institutional history that's kind of captured in these models. The other thing that I think is evolving more slowly, Mike, and I think this is a bigger issue and problem, is still talk to a lot of financial institutions who say, yeah, we're definitely looking at chatbots. We want it to handle the easy stuff. Like what's our routing number? I'm looking around the room, and I know there's a few of you at financial institutions and some of you who aren't, but look, here's the deal. If you have a problem in the call center with too many people asking what's your routing number, you don't have an AI or a customer service problem, you have a design problem. And I almost want to just, this is why I don't do customer support. because I pretty much slap people up in the head and go, Google it, for Christ's sake. You find it out. You have to make a phone call to ask routing number. Google, what's the bank's routing number? You find it. But this is still the mentality of wanting to handle the easy stuff so that our people can handle the harder stuff. Wrong 180 degrees. Your people don't have the experience that can be captured by a lot of the organizational history of tools because of the ability for these tools to capture the data. You want it to be augmenting people's performance, not replacing or displacing. And yes, I'm not talking about the job replacement, from an employment perspective, but it isn't a simple have the chatbots handle the easy stuff and have the people handle the hard stuff long. It's about handling everything and truly integrating the technology into people's jobs.
I want to pull on something you said earlier in your comment. When I used to work with a very large bank in the UK, and this isn't specific to just conversational AI, but just that promise of AI, data analytics, and business intelligence in general. That the days of old, right, where you in your village you had a branch and the bankers knew you personally and they knew what you did for work, and a lot of the decisioning that they made about you was very subjective based on just seeing you every single day. And of course, the world started to urbanize and we started living in more unpersonal large cities, and banks started getting massive and separating the duty of everybody within a bank, so they only saw a little piece. And the promise of AI at this bank, which I just thought was an incredible way to think about it, is how do I bring that level of personalization and that level that I know you intimately back? But we know we can't do it with human beings in a branch anymore. So does AI give us that promise? And I think this flavor of AI that we call natural language processing is part of a larger AI story, which then the promise there is I can do things in a highly personal way for you because I know you very well. This time, of course, by analyzing your data, as opposed to just seeing you in the town square every day. So I love that comment. And I do think that we often think of these virtual assistants for the customers, but you're absolutely right in terms of employees are adopting them at great speed. I mean, imagine for a contact center worker, for example, and every time you have to put the client on hold to go look up in a procedure manual how to do something. Would it be great if you just had your own personal assistant to help you do your job more effectively and efficient?
Okay, well I think, fabulous. We know that there's value, right? We know that there's value with AI being in the mix. So the next question in my mind is, how are banks today managing that? How are they embracing it? Like, what are the first steps that they're taking to start that journey? What have you been seeing? Nick, we'll have
I'll kick us off. I think the first most important portion is understanding your customer service and flow. So understanding, not as a banker, but as a customer, where does someone start? Where do they end? What takes place every step along the way? And so to Ron's point around FAQs, we see a lot of banks that figure, we'll give them FAQs, we'll put the FAQs into the chat, and really you're handing someone a map when they're telling you they're lost. You're not giving them a compass, you're not giving them any sort of tool. And so being able to guide them through that process and being able to analyze your customer service and flow, I think is the most important first step. It's, how does a customer come in? What are the sorts of questions that they're looking to have answered? What's the sort of customer segmentations that come into these channels? And how do you develop really specific novel journeys for those customer segments?
So I would agree with you if the decision was made that the customer service support area was a place to start. But I'm actually not convinced that is the first step, Nick, because I think what the financial institution needs to start with is asking, where's the biggest problem we've got where we need to get better information captured and then out to both the external customer and the internal employee. And one reason why I would think not to start with the customer support function is purely political and cultural in that they may feel like they're threatened. But starting in some other area, and it could be things like legal, marketing, IT, in other areas to demonstrate the value of the technology, to demonstrate, look, this doesn't actually replace people, it actually augments them, improves their productivity, and also utilizing the public source, open source applications that are now becoming available and how those can be integrated in. I think it's important to kind of take a more broader level than just the customer support function, because there may be some quicker hits and more impactful hits that could be achieved in a hybrid.
Certainly. I think in terms of technology, you have to have buy-in around technology. I think they go hand in hand. If you can't trust the technology and then you develop little MVPs, it's difficult to see it implemented at scale and see the value.
I kind of love that. A related story. So I'm an ex-Citibanker, and for those of you who know the Citibank history, there used to be a CEO called John Reed, who was an MIT grad and was sort of tasked earlier in his career to figure out what to do with all this technology stuff, right? So he's one of the big reasons why Citibank adopted the ATM and why why Citibank was one of the first movers in the ATM space. And being an MIT grad and being a sort of engineer science kind of mind, he thought the problem to solve was the technology, like how do we get this machine to work in a fault-tolerant way, etc. The biggest problem was actually, and you can actually see this video online if you Google. He went back to his alma mater many years later and he tells this story. The biggest factor was actually changing the behavior of the branch managers, who felt, to Ron's point, threatened at first that this thing is going to replace them or somehow take them out of the picture, losing jobs, and they didn't see it as a tool that could make them more efficient, provide more value-added services, and get some of this commodity stuff down. Anytime there's new technology adoption, you will see a large part of the bank feel threatened by it, and getting them to change their behavior and embrace it and seeing it as a value-added task rather than something that is threatening to them is something that I think we'll have to do. So I love that. I love the fact that we can think about using this in places that we haven't really thought of before, because in its early days, again, it was viewed as an IVR equivalent. So naturally it was about contact center servicing, which is probably the wrong place to start. I love that.
So let's talk about, because there's a lot of terms that get thrown out in this industry, right? And they get used interchangeably, but they have different meanings. So I often hear, oh, you're talking about chatbots. Oh, wait, but I've heard intelligent digital assistant. Can we just get the definitions out of the way, right? How can we just define what those two terms mean? Because they're not one and the same.
Yeah, I'll kick us off. So historically speaking, chatbots use something called logic-based decision trees. It's very similar to an if-then or if-so statement, and it's very easy to get lost. So what that means is you go down the decision tree and you end up in a place that is not necessarily where you wanted to end up, and it's very difficult to go back up your decision tree or your logic tree. And so really I think the caveat between a chatbot is understanding the mechanism that's guiding the person. So an intelligent virtual assistant is going to use something besides purely a logic tree. It's going to be more than just yes, no, if so, if then statements. It's going to be more around gathering information from the customer and having them guide themselves more than pushing them in directions.
Yeah, I've always kind of thought as the difference being the intelligent digital assistant incorporates some sort of machine learning capability that a chatbot wouldn't. But Deanna, to your question, I actually don't think we could impose definitions on the industry, because everyone's going to kind of believe what they believe about define it as they define it. What's important is that your organization defines it for itself so that there's some consistency, because give you an example, and this is becoming even worse now, not just chatbot versus intelligent digital assistant terminology, but just how generative AI has become the term du jour and now seems to encompass everything. Was moderating a panel at Boston FinTech Week a couple weeks ago about generative AI and the impact, and somebody brought up the point about ethical considerations and fairness in lending decisions, and I was like, time out. That's the output of machine learning, not necessarily a generative AI tool. And so the discussion's getting too muddy, and now, because generative AI is the hot term, it has subsumed the whole AI conversation, and it's getting messy.
Yeah. I think a lot of this has to do with both maturity as well as the promise. As we move into simple sort of menu-driven things or business rules things, which can be somewhat predictive, but not, right now we're embracing technologies that help the assistant remember and provide context that remember wasn't before. These capabilities didn't exist before. And really, when we start talking about Gen AI and how that's incorporating itself into the traditional chatbot or virtual assistant space, it's really on the NLG side, natural language generation, because it's able to suck in a lot more knowledge than it once did and provide a sort of plain English response. Whereas before, NLP was just more about like, do I understand what you're saying and am I producing a syntactically correct sentence on the return? But it really didn't have the ability to suck in a lot of data and response. So it was doing very simple things. Again, like move $100 from checking to saving. It was performing very simple tasks. So yes, it's an assistant, but it's not really providing you where we want to take this industry, providing you that financial advice and guidance and education. That's sort of the dream, but that's also a heavily supervised thing so we have to make sure that the responses that are coming back do incorporate not just fairness, but all kinds of things that we monitor for even when human advisors are guiding the clients, we have to make sure they're doing it in a regulatory compliant way. So that's the promise of the virtual assistant, because today the virtual assistant can do more simple tasks. But since people aren't embracing it, whether they're the employer or the customer, I think we have to keep going down this path.
It's the sucking in the data part, Mike,
Yeah.
that kind of really worries me right now, because number one, as you had mentioned, a lot of this was started with just FAQ type feeding in, and now, of course, it's coming from a larger. I think a lot of organizations don't kind of recognize that a lot of the data that's going to feed a lot of these models is not like the quantitative transaction data. It's qualitative data that's coming from documents.
Yes.
And unless you really have a good mechanism for tagging and categorizing the documents, I know of one bank where the innovation group literally, was considering asking the organization to not send emails and memos for 3 months, so they get there. And they're obviously a totally unrealistic request, but it gives you a sense for what the problem is. The second thing too is now with the chat GPTs of the world, we're not just sucking in internal data, we're sucking in external data. And I like to say that the internet really is a gold mine of data, but it's a gold mine that sits in the middle of a data landfill. And when you stick your hand in for data, you're not sure if you're going to get a gold nugget or a handful of garbage.
Yeah.
And garbage in, garbage out never applied more than it does right now into these models.
Yeah. I think actually, to that point, even if I'm just consuming internal bank information, internal bank documentation, it will actually start to uncover things that people don't even realize. Not necessarily biases, that's a possibility, but it will start to recognize patterns among a large trove of historical documentation that the bank didn't realize that they were doing things wrong. That's why I don't think you're seeing a lot of banks unleash Gen AI directly to customers. I think they're using it more internally first to kind of start to feel this stuff out, because the impact to the employee might be less onerous than the impact to the consumer if you're doing something completely wacky.
So Ron, given the importance of the data and pulling out the golden nuggets versus a lot of garbage, in your opinion, is there an optimal approach for these FIs to implement conversational AI in their organization? And do you recommend that it requires multiple, intelligent digital assistants?
So I think there's a couple of pieces in there, Guiana, and then the first is, I don't think that the idea of so how can we use generative AI or conversational AI or chatbots is the right first question. To me, the first question is always, what are the problems we have to solve and what are the opportunities we could take advantage of? And I think too many financial institutions that I see and talk to are starting with the technology first and then trying to figure it out, instead of starting with the business problem and also concurrently starting with a data strategy and plan and the data modeling aspect of it. And it's funny because one banker that I have a lot of respect for, who blogs a lot, Chris Nichols at South State Bank, wrote, you don't need data models. And so I was like a little kind of taken back on that one. I'm going to talk to him more about it. But us consultants have been yelling at financial institutions for 15 years now, get your data in order, get your data in order. And now I think it's really becoming critical. And then goes to your second part of your question, which is, again, I see too many organizations who think, yes, we're just going to have one big honking, chatbot model. And no, I think there's going to evolve to be, different functional specific, very niche focused models. So thinking about how that evolves in the organization, it's actually going to be tough for a lot of mid-sized and smaller financial institutions because it's a set of skills that they don't have internally and, quite frankly, probably never will. And I'm going to wait for Jay later on when we chatting for him to tell me I'm wrong, that he can find it at a relatively large credit union, but still not huge in the terms of the whole banking realm. But what it really points to is picking your partners, correct, your technology partners and vendors. I still think there's too much of a focus on feature functionality and not enough focus on which vendors are going to, really help me innovate and move to a different, technology model in the future.
To Ron's point, I couldn't agree more around data models. I think when you're thinking of in terms of analogy, it's like we have an engine, right? So if you're using an engine, the first thing you have to do is refine what's in it. So to Ron's point, if you're filling an engine with, 80 octane gas, it's not going to run. So you have to go through that process, analyze your data sources, and come up with a strategy as an organization, not necessarily bifurcated by division, but as a whole on how you're going to approach refining that data before you put it into any sort of engine.
By the way, Chris is here. I did see that earlier. I fully agree, especially on the last point around, this will be specific to your role, your division in the bank. There is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all virtual assistant for every possible role in the bank. And there's a reason why we have separation of duty within the bank based on your role. So they will be consuming different documents, different data, different manuals based on the nature of their job. That's no question. So, yeah.
All right, so the proof is always in the pudding, right? So we have financial institutions that are using this technology today. We'll start with Nick. Why don't you start? Can you provide a real-world example of how it's being used with some of our customers?
Certainly. So we'll use SoFi as an example. I think SoFi is a great example for two reasons. First, they already had a virtual assistant in place, an intelligent virtual assistant. And so there's a couple different ways you can grade success. It's if you're starting from zero, if you're starting from already having a tool in place. And for SoFi, their most important concern was actually lowering the attrition rate for calls. And so understanding how are they moving customers to the call center, and how are they lowering any sort of average hold time, how are they converting those customers more quickly, and after displacing their last chatbot, that was going to be their main focus. And so it was actually less around providing them with information in the chat and more about providing them a mechanism to leave the chat and to successfully exit the chat rather than we're just going to fill the chat with every question you could possibly want answered. Their focus was really a customer comes in and they don't want to spend all day in this chat. They want to come in, get their question answered, resolved, and move out. And so for most of our clients, they see average handling time, their attrition rate as two of the most important factors.
Clayton, sir, or anything else?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting example. They've obviously had success with those metrics, but I think to Ron's point, it'll be interesting to see where banks go beyond this, right? To the point of that this isn't just for clients, it's also for employees. And a lot of those, again, a lot of the starting points have been in that client servicing and contact center type of organization. So the same metrics are being applied. Average handling time, first call resolution are very call center type of metrics, which is fine to get your feet wet with this technology. But I think every bank needs to think about what comes next and where can I use these capabilities, far beyond what I thought I needed them for, right?
I think that brings up a good point, because the other component that using SoFi as a continued example is they want to be able to provide information quickly. And so the generative AI is not just purely for the customer. So as soon as they get moved over, they can see the entirety of the chat history. So there's no having to go back through the call log. There's no having to go back through the chat. It's having, in a couple sentences, here's the concern, here's the character or the customer type, and really handing them a good first when handing it off.
Yeah, I love that example because it's actually a blend of what the customer needs and what the employee needs. So if you are transitioning in the chat window from a robot to a human, you don't want that experience that you often get with a call center, which is I'm going to put you on hold while I spend the next 10 minutes reading through what you just talked about in the chatbot. So using generative AI in a completely novel way, which is let me summarize all this, hand it to the client servicing agent so they can start more quickly and not put you on hold yet again. So I like that's a good blend of user needs.
And I think it speaks to that if you're, a newer employee to the bank, you can get up to speed that much faster versus someone who's been a seasoned employee. So I think that's a really compelling business case, right? Like this technology is enabling, like you were saying, like there are people that have left the bank. COVID has changed the dynamics in the bank, Ron. So the technology is allowing the newer employees to still service that customer in a favorable way faster, or at least comparable to the seasoned
Right, so
CSR.
this is the comment that's going to get my ass kicked out of here as I disagree with my hosts who were gracious to bring me here. And for all the talk that we in the industry have around this and the vendors in the space talk about the improvement in the customer experience, it's really about employee productivity enhancement. And by making the employees more productive, that is what makes the customer experience better, because the employee either doesn't need to answer the question or answers it better, quicker, and faster. But the focus from an organizational perspective actually needs to be more about productivity improvement than this sort of, we're going to improve the customer experience. It's too sort of obtuse a concept. Focus on improving employee productivity, and therefore the customer experience will improve. Because I will tell you this, and you guys can disagree with me, the whole thing about, where it's going to be better, advice and guidance, I'm not buying it. This isn't rocket science, and we haven't improved advice and guidance after 25 years with PFM aggregation, all this other thing, and I'm not quite sure what magic AI is going to bring to the table to make that a step function better. The problem isn't better advice and guidance. The problem is human behavior, and the tools don't do a good enough job at changing human behavior. So that's not the purpose and reason for bringing these technologies to the table. It's internal human productivity and ultimately creativity improvement from an innovation as you figure out, here's how we can use these tools to get to new products, solutions, ideas, process improvement faster than we can by taking your people out to a conference room and doing silly innovation exercises. I'm not buying that either. So
I think we can have both, right? Because that old saying, happy employees make happy customers. So keeping it simple and keeping it that contact center environment. Most of the contact centers in general in any industry have enormous attrition. Why? Because a lot of these jobs are really boring. Like, how many times a day do I want to answer what your account balance is, or did my check clear, all that. And so the nature of the work isn't great. People usually only call if they're upset about something. So to your point, if we make them more productive, more efficient, so you can make both the employee experience better and thereby extension make the client experience better. So I think we can have a bit of both.
I would agree with you, Mike. I think that, in Ron's point, I do believe that you have to measure productivity, but it's both qualitative and quantitative. If we're using the call center example, if employee A, who gets through 100 calls every hour, maybe doesn't listen to them very well, but he's real productive. Then you have employee B, who maybe gets through 25 calls every hour, but every single customer leaves that call feeling like they've been addressed, So I really think that, to Mike's point, it's a combination of understanding that improving productivity might have more of a focus on qualitative and less quantitative. And as you're improving the qualitative process, it's important to have tools at your disposal to give that employee something to augment the experience.
I totally agree, but here's where business strategy becomes important. Any USAA customers here, members? Yeah, I love your experience with USAA, yes. I had the benefit of getting a tour of USAA a number of years ago. They took me through the call center, and I got to listen in on a customer support call. It was very emotional. The wife of a deployed military member was calling in. She had some issues, and her husband is deployed 10,000 miles away. And the purpose, the goal of the customer service agent was not, gee, I need to get off of this call in 5 minutes or my metrics. The purpose was, I'm going to stay on the phone as long as it takes to make this person, feel more comfortable and, get her down from a bad emotional situation. So, but the problem is you've got to look at this from a strategy perspective and, what's important to your organization. Getting off the call faster should not be actually staying on the phone. Is it more engagement, more interaction with your employees? That it should be actually the other way around.
Yeah, switch from average handling time to other metrics like first call resolution, no matter how long it takes to resolve the issue.
But also categorization of the call.
Yeah.
And if it is I need help, then that's a 30-minute call.
Yeah.
If I need my routing number, it's like, no, go somewhere else for that,
Right.
Or get it off as,
Right. And that would be actually a great example of, this has nothing to do with chatbots, but knowing routing number and account number, and you look at a lot of the P2P players when they first came on, all I need to know is your phone number and your email. So you're actually solving, instead of relegating looking up my routing number to a robot or something or some kind of self-service, you actually solve it a different way. Like you'll never need to know routing numbers because we're going to just do it in a much simpler way. So I do agree with you that you have to say what is the nature of the problem, and just automating a bad process is probably not the answer. So we have to take that logic and apply it to the world of virtual assistants.
Listen, if you have clients who have problems with too many calls coming in routing numbers, tell them to create refrigerator magnets that have the routing number on it and send it off.
Right.
Because if my mother at 87 had that on her thing, she'd go, oh, right, there you go. I don't need to call the bank. There's the and have.
And of course, the magnet is connected via Wi-Fi, and it's actually.
But make it so that they can stick pictures of the grandchildren.
Yes.
Let's be real. Who's really calling in?
Yeah. That's right.
All right, so let's kind of taper into these folks want your opinions on what's the key takeaway you want them to walk out of the room with. Keep in mind as they're embarking on conversational AI adoption. What's the one key thing that's really important for them to keep in mind? So Nip, we'll start with you and then we'll go to Ron and Mike.
I think I'm going to give two things, not
Okay.
one. I think Ron brought up a great point. How do you measure productivity as an organization?
You actually.
Well, I think about it. And I think that is really important, is understanding. I think the USA follows a great example, like what's important to your employees and what's important to your customers. The second is having a data strategy that goes across your organization, not just having it exist for the call center, for your business intelligence team, for your SLT team, but having a data strategy that is actively working to refine all of the data that you're capturing on a regular basis. And I think those would be the two most important takeaways.
Ron, what do you think?
Two most important takeaways. Number one, the technology is not just for customer support function, but is total enterprise. And number two, you've got to start with a prioritization and focus on the problem, the severity of problems and the scope of opportunity.
Mike, what do you think?
I would say whatever the technology is, whether it's AI, chatbots, or whatever it is, don't just digitize or automate your existing business process. Solve the right problem. Use this as an opportunity to change your business model. and really use this technology in an interesting way that don't just suddenly, just like we said, generation 1 chatbots were basically IVR replacements, the wrong strategy solving the wrong problem. Use these technologies as a way to completely and fundamentally change your business model.
Does anyone in the audience have questions for you?
Yeah, I was in a car accident weeks ago and called USA, and it was a fantastic experience end to end. It's total loss, but it was not my fault, so kudos to them for that.
All right.
And you're not hurt, so you were not hurt?
I was transferred like to the events, yeah. I guess my question is, when I think in terms of, this is more like I go to the chatbot, I call, or I'm an employee and go with that up. Are there any use cases that are more proactive for you to for that chatbot to reach out the employee or the customer to engage them and solve a particular problem?
Yeah, I can talk to the customer experience portion. So there's lots of organizations that companies can partner with. A good example for us is a company called Personetics, and that's embedding or other data points that can act as a financial wellness tool to make proactive suggestions. And so, as chatbots are pretty reactive today, we want to get to a point where post-tokenization, so once they know who you are, it's proactive. And so it's either giving you reminders around your next coming payment, letting you know that you have access to specific CDs, things like that from a customer perspective. And so it's understanding where you want to combine that data and what tools you want to add in to enable that proactive experience.
There's very simple examples that already exist today. You already send electronic alerts and notifications, typically in the form of text and emails, that invite you to click this button or click this link, and it takes you not just back to the bank's website or online banking, but to a chatbot, and that engages you in that way. So you can marry up two existing technologies to handle that proactive scenario. I think it'll get more sophisticated in the future, but that's a very simple scenario that we see today.
Yeah, the thing I would add there, and I am not deep into this, but I think efforts like Copilot from Microsoft, and Salesforce must have something. It's the integration embedding of the AI capability into the enterprise systems that support whatever functions, whether it's accounting, ERM, ERP, and I'm sure there are some examples of them, but that's where I think it's kind of going, where ultimately you don't know as an employee that you're accessing something that's AI versus the system you're just using to get your job done.
All right, thank you. So I'll just first short this point. I think with the Apple Watch, you see a lot of the notifications come to you, or your heart rate is too high, take it easy, or you haven't slept enough, you will get some sleep. So it just builds engagement.
Yeah.
But the question that I was actually going to ask is, I think it was on emotion capture, right? Sentence can be said in 100 ways, and you can capture the essence of the statement. I can say the same thing. My eyes might be, I need an answer, or how much of that sentiment and emotion is captured by these tools? Same example that you give for USA, right? I may be crying on the phone, and I may say, I've lost my card, as opposed to just saying, I lost my card. So, how do these channels capture that emotion? Because if you lose it, then again, it's just a question would be, if I'm redirecting someone who's crying who wants a card to, fill out this form and do this and do that, that's obviously not right? So,
there's a lot of ways that, for example, routing to the right agent, for example, has been something we've been doing again since the IVR days, right? Knowing, once you've identified that it's Nick that's chatting in or calling in or what have you, Nick and this agent always, seem to bond well, or Nick always calls in about his investments account, so we're going to send him over to this side of the bank. And so you can do that even with chatbots and virtual assistants, of the right routing to the right person. The sentiment thing, we also use this same kinds of AI to understand context and sentiment, and it can sense using your word choices, and maybe you started out with punctuation and it didn't end up with punctuation, so it's starting to understand that, okay, maybe this is a time where I'm going to transfer you to a human that can bring it back. And I do think that this, even though we've been talking about using this for internal staff productivity, what if it's a Saturday at 11 p.m. and the last thing you want to do is talk to an offshore contact center? The promise of these technologies is that you can do this 24/7, and it's also smart enough, right, to understand your emotional context at that moment.
I think Jay had a question here.
I do. So you kind of mentioned it, but humans are a significant proponent of this. They have to adapt ultimately these technologies, right? So there's a lot of pre-work that has to be done. If you want to have an internal bot that focuses on productivity, you better have a mature knowledge management program, right?
Yes.
If you don't have that, you talent that understands this. In marketing, if you use generative AI to generate actual ad creative, you need people that understand how this works and how to curate it. All right. Obviously, we cannot afford to send people for 7 years to get masters in artificial intelligence. But we cannot outsource all that either, because we have to explain to our regulators how this works.
Yeah.
Right. So, what is your advice to raise this talent into it?
You want me to go first?
Sure.
Yeah, so I think that you bring up a great point. We'll use ChatGPT as an example. So it's trained by internal data and external data. And obviously, once you've opened it up to the masses, everyone from PhD to high school dropout, you're going to have a little bit of nuance. And so it's going to, over time, devolve. And so I think creating secure environments where you're training with really specific customer or employee segments is and should be a priority to start. And so rather than opening it up and letting anyone at the organization interact with it, if you're going to have something that's going to be generating creative material, have the marketing team be the one that's feeding that engine. If you're going to be doing something with operations, have the operations team be the one that's feeding that engine. It's really a matter of managing the inputs from a training perspective rather than just opening it up to the masses.
I do think that folks who create machine learning types of technologies are getting better at what I would call transparency switches, so that it shows you how it came to a certain conclusion, whether that's generating a new marketing text for your website or whatever it is. So the technology is starting to be able to show you its sort of thought process and how it got there. The early versions of these types of adaptable machine learning types of algorithms didn't have that. It was a black box, and there's still some out there that we still don't know how it came to that particular conclusion. But they're getting better and better at leaving an audit trail, if you will, of how the logic worked. I think as you go into like super deep learning and some of the neural network stuff, that gets a little harder to do. But for just your day-to-day machine learning stuff, the transparency switches work pretty well. Also, it depends on the frequency, right? Like, let's say you're creating marketing content for your bank's website. That doesn't change enough. Like, you can still put in a manual, like, you can eliminate some of your marketing staff because you've generated the content, and then you have compliance read it and give it a thumbs up. You can still have those manual checkpoints along the way. But because we don't really change certain things, we don't change that frequently, so it's probably still okay to have that manual checkpoint.
Don't good. Last question, then we're at the top of the hour.
Nope. So this is a kind of macro question, so maybe a good way to wrap it up. So the message of, augmenting, improving productivity, not replacing. I think folks in this room probably agree that's the way to go. But when you think about like CEOs, leaders of these institutions, especially with expense pressures, et cetera, like from your perspective, do you see them actually buying into that, or do you think they're, especially in this environment, too tempted to maybe just buy into the alternative view, which is actually replace, and then just sort of roll the dice and see what happens? Like how would you sort of change that mindset from those leaders' perspective to not sort of fall prey to that tempting alternative view?
So let me make sure I understood the question. So changing a leader's mind in terms of using this technology to reduce headcount and cost as the only sort of business case?
Exactly, yeah.
As
Because
opposed,
I
yeah.
imagine there's probably, specific metrics, like imagine, their expense pressure, et cetera, and with the waves of layoffs. There has to be some of that, right? So curious.
Yes, there will always be that pressure, whether it's AI or any technology, of how can I do more with less people and how can technology take me there. But it's, one of the things that you'll find, two things, right? One is that if you're just using technology to lay people off and you're not giving them a path to the job that allows them to provide more value and do more creative things, that's probably a mistake. The second thing is you always find with new technologies, it actually creates new jobs, right? If you've got to have, whether it's inside the bank or a vendor that you're partnering with, these models need to be trained. These models need to be checked. The kind of audit trail to make sure you understand how it came to. So whole new careers start popping up. Not everyone's going to be fungible enough to I'm a call center worker and now I'm training a model. Maybe not, but these things do tend to create new jobs.
I think to Ron's point around having a problem to start with. I mean, I think that almost all problems at any business fall down to either an operational problem, business, an actual cost problem. And so I think when you're peeling back any business problem, one of the final symptoms is going to be cost. And so I think that it's easy to conflate cost cutting with implementing tools like this, but any business problem you're solving ultimately is going to impact cost, hopefully positively.
If I were talking to a bank CEO who said, forget the productivity stuff, I need to reduce headcount, I would probably be very inclined to say, okay, so what other bank do you know of that has significantly reduced its headcount because of this successfully? And I am willing to bet they can't come up with any examples. So what does that tell you, Mr. or Ms. Bank CEO? Is that that may be what you want, but it ain't going to be what you get.
And Galileo Connecta, by the way, is designed to replace the CEO altogether.